This was a sort of a fascinating glimpse into just how effed we are in this society. And the backdrop of this, of course, the concern about wokeness, the concern about CRT.
You're looking for racism everywhere.
You're looking for, you want to racialize everything. And this was supposed to be all over after the president was black. So why are you looking for racism everywhere? And it is, one of the things that we try and do on this program is to provide some historical context of some major themes in American history. But you should be aware that history is not a series of snapshots. That's not what history is. The way that we examine it can be, but there is a reality that exists. It is not chopped up into moments.
There's an inheritance.
There's an inheritance. And sometimes it's almost like you can't even, the inheritance doesn't just happen when one era dies. It is an ongoing inheritance that exists. Every second that emerges is embedded with the second that preceded it. And it is important to understand this history so that you can really assess what's happening in the moment. Because if you're not aware of what has happened in the past, your imagination for what is possible in terms of what is going on right now is severely limited. And it gets even more severely limited if you have people who are propagandizing and trying to change that past history. Whether it's Dennis Prager going, can you imagine if we treated the way that we treat the unvaccinated now, if we had treated AIDS patients that way?
He was saying there was no stigma associated with having AIDS.
It was, we'll go on and on into that, but it was way beyond anything that we're seeing today. I mean, just by leaps and bounds.
Yes.
But he can say that because even though that was certainly within his lifetime where he was probably talking about how disgusting gay people were for having AIDS.
And racializing it too.
In this country, we have very little historical understanding of where we come. There has been an ongoing project in this country to obscure certain realities. The lost cause. There was an entire movement built around obscuring the reasons for the Civil War in this country. So here's Pete Buttigieg, not necessarily my favorite person, an intelligent guy who for much of his career, I think has not used his intelligence in the way that I would appreciate, but facts are facts. And here he is giving a speech at a press conference at the White House. And I don't know exactly what he was referring to, but this concept that can infrastructure be racist? In other words, I think everybody understands that like a building is not racist in and of itself, but the way that it's designed. For instance, is slavery racist? It's just a thing. Doesn't exist. It exists, as a generic thing. But slavery in this country was racist. And slavery is always wrong, but it was specifically racist in this country. But here's the talk. Play the clip.
As to where we target those dollars, I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or that would have been in New York, was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices. I don't think we have anything to lose by confronting that simple reality. And I think we have everything to gain by acknowledging it and then dealing with it, which is why the reconnecting communities, that $1 billion, is something we want to get to work right away, putting to work.
And apparently, like everybody, he was expressing shock to how people reacted the first time he talked about it. Well, I got news for you. The third time he talks about it, he's going to express shock about the way that people reacted the second time he talked about it.
Total conniption.
Yeah, we don't want to think about this. We don't want to think about this.
It wasn't even like that. It was even more clueless than that. It was like, you idiot.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Of course, liberals seeing racism in every corner of society.
He was speaking specifically about the machinations of a guy named Robert Moses, who was, I think he had like a dozen different, I don't know how many different titles he had in New York, but it was basically Public Works, City, Department of Parks. I can't remember.
Czar of moving around, I think.
Yes. And Robert Caro wrote the sort of the definitive biography of him, although I don't even think there was any other biography. But
Power Broker, yep.
And this was a very popular book back when I was in my 20s and 30s. I don't know when it was produced, but I think it was around there. I mean, I think I read it around college.
It was in the 70s, I think.
Okay. But it became very sort of, people became much more aware of it, it seemed to me, around that time. And Moses was apparently, according to Caro, one of the most racist people I've ever met.
He basically drove chauffeured around in New York being racist and figuring out how to ruin neighborhoods with highways and stuff.
Robert Moses was reportedly, when he was involved in building public pools in the city, making pools for Black Americans colder than ones that had access, that white people had access to.
Also from this book, I think.
Yes, same book.
And apparently he also felt like, look, you can pass laws, but you can change those laws. But what you cannot change as easily is concrete. Mm-hmm. And read the, do we have the passage?
It's right here.
Yeah, I got it here.
Can we put it up too?
Yeah, I'll read it. Underlying Moses' strikingly strict policing for cleanliness in his parks was Francis Perkins realized with shock, deep distaste for the public that was using them. He doesn't love people, she was to say. It used to shock me because he was doing all these things for the welfare of the people. He denounced the common people terribly. To him, they were lousy, dirty people throwing bottles all over Jones Beach. I'll get them, I'll teach them. He loves the public, but not his people. I'll skip a little bit ahead here. Now he began to take measures to limit use of his parks. He had restricted the use of state parks by poor and lower middle class families in the first place by limiting access to the park. So not just racist, but classist, I just add there. By limiting access to the parks by rapid transit, he had vetoed the Long Island Railroad's proposed construction of a branch spur to Jones Beach for this reason. Now he began to limit access by buses. He instructed Shapiro to build the bridges across his new parkways too low for buses to pass. Bus trips therefore had to be made on local roads, making the trips discouragingly long and arduous. For Negroes, whom he considered inherently dirty, there were further measures. Buses needed permits to enter state parks. Buses chartered by Negro groups found it very difficult to obtain permits, etc., etc.
This is the way that you segregate societies without having to put up a sign saying that society is segregated.
Just like you can be racist if you don't, scream racist expletives. They make the bar really low on purpose in order to clear themselves of any wrongdoing.
Well, they make it about individual bigotry and not structural policy.
And there's nothing more structural than our infrastructure.
Right, and this whole playing coy about this, we all know what wrong side of the tracks means, right? We all have a common sense awareness that these sorts of grand decisions do have implications for people and political implications.
And we have to understand redlining.
The point is, with the wrong side of the tracks, same thing with the way they did the highway system, very much so in the 50s and whatnot. We're going to segregate the city by putting literally a barrier in the middle of the city. So we will cut the, I-290 will go through these neighborhoods here and make sure that it's very difficult for you to cross over from the poor section, very often maybe the black section of a city, into this other section, the white section. And the way that you set up public transport, I mean, we just had this happen, I don't know, 5-6 years ago with the
Look at the subway map.
The Atlanta,
Yeah.
the Georgian, what do they call it? Whatever the Georgia transit system was to go out to.
Was it BART?
I don't know. I think that's San Francisco, but Cobb County into the stadium for the Braves because they didn't want to allow poor people, and very often people, these stops also in black neighborhoods, to get to the game.
I mean, this is a big thing in sports in general, putting the stadiums way out in the suburbs. Atlanta Hawks basketball team had a thing where they're like, are we getting a little bit too... The owners, I can't remember exactly what they said, but they were anxious about the demographics of who was showing up at their basketball games.
And does that mean that the stadium itself is racist? I mean, come on. Do you really get like a child?
Yep. Well, I mean, the Braves stadium might be a little racist.
Well, that's true. Inherent in the name.
Yeah,
but
Tomahawk chop.
But I mean, this is the grown-ups understand this. We will talk about the child who doesn't understand it later.
Well, Tucker and Joe Rogan and all those types.
Right. This idea, and we can go back. You can see this in the things, in some instances. It's not necessarily, the intent isn't necessarily to be racist, and there also can be racism. There's racism embedded in our tax code. Go back and listen to the interview with Dorothy Brown. It's simply because of the way that our system works.
But I mean,
where the political power is shapes the nature of our society. And so if you have a segment of the population that has been historically denied political power, and that can be both on a class basis and a race basis, then the way that the city or the state or the nation is structured, both in terms of physical and non-physical infrastructure, is going to reflect the desires and the will of the people in power, which means it's going to necessarily disadvantage people who have been out of power.
Just focus on what the Rogan types and the Tucker types choose to naturalize and what they're curious about. They're deliberately incurious or uncurious about like these historical facts that we can print out and look at in front of our eyes. They don't want to learn about that, but then they can conspiracy theorize about, I don't know, DMT when it comes to Rogan or January 6th when it comes to Tucker.
I will say this. I think you've described Rogan to some extent. But Tucker Carlson knows.
I know.
He is just a bigoted liar, period. Rogan may be a little bit ignorant in specific or a lot ignorant in specific areas, and listening to Tucker knows exactly.
And he likes it.
What he's doing.
He likes the way
he
this
is a fabricator.
Yeah.